4 o'clock in the morning. It's like my third time trying to do a video. Keep running that space. But anyway, another reaction video. Creepy, dark, girl. You hear me? One of my favorite channels. Been watching it for a little minute. But anyway, you already know how to do my reaction videos. Ain't no pausing. Ain't no none of that. Straight watch the video for the next 20 minutes and 22 seconds. Watch the whole video all the way out to the end. And y'all put in the comment section what y'all want to see next. Subscribe, hit the like button, down button, don't matter.
Neon lights of the McDonald's sign buzzed quietly in the humid night air, casting an eerie red and yellow glow over the empty parking lot. It was nearly midnight, and the drive-thru was still open, but the inside of the restaurant had long since closed. Behind the counter, a lone worker named Cassie was finishing up her shift, wiping down the counters and cleaning the floors. The radio in the kitchen played a soft hum of pop music, but the stillness of the night seemed to seep through the walls, making the air heavy with unease. Cassie had been working at this McDonald's for over a year. It was located on the edge of town, far from the bustling city, and it never got too busy. Tonight, however, something felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a tension in the air, like the calm before a storm. The clock struck 0:10 a.m., and Cassie sighed, tying the trash bag and preparing to take it out to the dumpster behind the building. As she pushed open the back door, a gust of cool air hit her, and she shivered despite the warmth of the night. The dumpster loomed in the dimly lit alley, the shadows stretching out like long fingers, creeping toward her as she approached. Just as she was about to toss the bag into the dumpster, she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, carried by the wind. Cassie. She froze, the trash bag slipping from her hand and landing with a soft thud on the ground. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scanned the alley. There was no one there. The darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides, and the only sound was the distant hum of the drive-thru speaker. Cassie. The whisper came again, more distinct this time. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as her eyes darted from shadow to shadow, trying to locate the source of the voice. But there was nothing. Just the empty alley and the silent dumpster. With shaky hands, she grabbed the trash bag and quickly tossed it into the dumpster, slamming the lid shut with a loud clang. She rushed back inside, locking the door behind her and leaning against it, her heart racing. She tried to shake it off, convincing herself that it was just her imagination, or maybe the wind playing tricks on her. But deep down she knew something was wrong. The whisper had sounded so real, so close, like someone was standing right behind her. As she finished up her closing tasks, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every creak of the building, every flicker of the fluorescent lights, sent her nerves on edge. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching her. But every time she looked, there was nothing. By 0:30 a.m., the drive-thru had gone quiet, and the last car had come and gone. Cassie was just about to lock the front doors when the phone behind the counter rang, cutting through the silence like a knife. Startled, she picked it up. "McDonald's, how can I help you?" she asked, her voice a little too high-pitched. There was silence on the other end. No breathing, no static, just dead air. "Hello?" she said again, but still there was no response. She was about to hang up when she heard it, soft, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. "Cassie." She slammed the phone down, her hands trembling. Someone was messing with her. It had to be a prank. But who would know her name? Who would call at this hour just to whisper her name like that? Trying to calm herself down, she checked the time. 0:45 a.m. Just 15 more minutes, and she could go home. She grabbed the keys from behind the counter and walked to the front doors, locking them tightly. As she turned back toward the kitchen, she noticed something on the floor, just by the counter. A single French fry. Her heart skipped a beat. She had cleaned the floor earlier. She knew for a fact there hadn't been any fries left lying around. Slowly, she bent down to pick it up, her hand shaking. As she straightened up, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. A shadow, just beyond the counter, slipping into the hallway that led to the restrooms. Cassie froze, her breath catching in her throat. Someone was in the restaurant. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her eyes fixed on the hallway, waiting for whoever or whatever it was to come back out. But nothing moved. The hallway remained eerily still, the shadows dark and impenetrable. Grabbing her phone from her pocket, she dialed the number for the police. Her hands shaking.
No, I said I wasn't gonna pause. Y'all notice I ain't turned that light off. No.
So badly she could barely press the buttons. The phone rang twice before it connected. "What's your emergency?"
Might not turn it
Cassie
off.
opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say a word, the lights in the restaurant flickered, then went out, plunging her into total darkness. "Hello?" The operator's voice crackled through the phone, but Cassie couldn't respond. She was frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the darkness seemed to close in around her. And then she heard it again, louder this time, coming from the hallway. "Cassie." The phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide, straining to see through the darkness. The whisper was getting closer, the voice more insistent, more menacing. "Cassie." Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the hallway, its silhouette barely visible in the faint light coming from the parking lot outside. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its limbs long and thin, like something out of a nightmare. It stood there, motionless, watching her. Cassie backed away slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel her pulse in her ears, hear the blood rushing through her veins, as the figure took a step toward her. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. The figure didn't respond. It just kept moving closer, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the fear radiating off of her. Cassie's back hit the counter, and she realized with a jolt that she had nowhere left to go. She was trapped. The figure was only a few feet away now, its face still hidden in shadow. Desperate, she grabbed a metal tray from the counter and threw it at the figure. It passed right through it, clattering to the floor with a loud crash. The figure didn't flinch. It just kept coming. In one final act of desperation, Cassie screamed, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the empty restaurant, piercing the silence of the night. But no one was there to hear her. The figure reached out, its long, bony fingers brushing against her arm. A wave of cold washed over her, freezing her to the core. And then, everything went black. The next morning, the manager arrived to find the restaurant in disarray. The tables were overturned, the counters a mess, and the front doors still locked from the inside. But there was no sign of Cassie. All that was left behind was a single French fry, lying in the middle of the floor, and the faint whisper of her name, carried on the wind. Cassie. The police arrived shortly after the manager's frantic call, combing through the restaurant for clues. Cassie's disappearance had rattled everyone. She was well-liked, responsible, and wouldn't just vanish without a trace. But after hours of searching, they found nothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle. The place was empty, eerily still, save for the overturned tables and the single French fry left behind as a sinister calling card. One officer lingered near the drive-through window, staring out into the dark lot, trying to piece together the strange scene. "Maybe she ran off," he suggested half-heartedly to his partner. His partner, Officer Jacobs, shook his head. "There's no way. Her car's still in the lot. No signs of her leaving. Something happened here." They both glanced at the security cameras, hoping the footage would shed light on what had occurred. The grainy black and white video flickered on the screen as they rewound to the early hours of the morning. Cassie appeared on the monitor, cleaning the floors just before midnight, moving mechanically through her nightly routine. The footage showed her locking the front doors, exactly as the manager had found them. Then the camera over the drive-thru picked up the last car pulling away after receiving its order. After that, the place was deserted. They fast-forwarded the footage until something caught their attention, movement in the kitchen. It was Cassie again, just moments before the clock struck midnight. She was standing by the trash cans looking around nervously as if she heard something. Her eyes darted to the back door, where the camera just barely caught her stepping outside to toss the garbage. They could see her hesitate, then spin around, her expression suddenly fearful. But the cameras outside were out of range. They couldn't see what had scared her. "Wait, go back," Jacob said, leaning forward. The video rewound again to the exact moment Cassie re-entered the building. She locked the door behind her and stood there, panting, her back pressed against the wall as if something was chasing her. Her eyes were wide with terror. Then, out of nowhere, she jerked her head toward the front counter, her body stiffening as she saw something off-screen. "What the hell is she looking at?" the officer whispered, as Cassie's face on the screen filled with pure dread. She walked cautiously toward the front counter, her steps slow and deliberate. The camera position behind the counter showed her stopping abruptly, bending down to pick something up off the floor. "Pause it," Jacobs ordered. The screen froze on a still image of Cassie holding something small in her hand. A French fry. Both officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of it. They resumed the video, watching as Cassie stood frozen, staring at the fry for several seconds before slowly looking up toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. Her body tensed, her expression growing more horrified by the second. She was staring down that hallway as though she could see something they couldn't. The officers fast-forwarded through several more minutes of footage. Cassie stood still for a long time, seemingly paralyzed. Then, without warning, the lights flickered violently, plunging the restaurant into complete darkness. "What the hell?" Jacobs muttered, leaning closer to the screen. The power remained out for a few seconds, but when the lights flickered back on, Cassie was gone. No trace of her. The hallway was empty. The entire restaurant was still. They let the footage run for another 20 minutes, but there was no sign of movement, no explanation for what had happened to her. It was as if she had simply disappeared. "That's impossible," the other officer muttered, his face pale. "She couldn't just vanish like that." "There's something else," Jacob said grimly. "Look at the timer." He pointed to the timestamp on the video. The footage had frozen at exactly 0:33 a.m., the moment the lights had gone out. But when they fast-forwarded through the rest of the footage, the time remained the same. The clocks in the restaurant had stopped. Both officers stood in stunned silence. Something wasn't right with this place. Days turned into weeks, and despite a thorough investigation, Cassie was never found. The case went cold, filed away as an unsolved mystery. But strange things began to happen around the McDonald's after her disappearance. Staff members reported hearing whispers in the empty restaurant late at night, the soft sound of a young woman's voice calling out for help. Cassie. It always happened after midnight, when the restaurant was at its quietest. Fryers would turn on by themselves, the scent of cooking food filling the air despite no one touching them. Chairs would move on their own, shifting slightly as if someone invisible was sitting down to eat. One night, a new worker, Carlos, was closing up alone. He had heard the rumors but didn't believe in ghosts. As he mopped the floor, he noticed something odd. Believe in ghosts. As he mopped the floor, he noticed something odd. A trail of French fries leading from the counter to the back hallway, one fry at a time. His brow furrowed in confusion, wondering if someone was playing a prank on him. He followed the trail to the dark hallway, his heart pounding harder with each step. The last fry was placed right in front of the restroom door, which was slightly ajar, creaking softly as it swayed back and forth. He hesitated, staring into the pitch black beyond the door. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the familiar cold whisper brushed against his ear. "Carlos." His blood turned to ice. Dropping the mop, he bolted for the front door, not bothering to lock up as he fled into the night. He never returned to work after that. It's been over a year since Cassie's disappearance, and that McDonald's has earned a dark reputation. Some say she was taken by something that wasn't human, something lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Others think she became part of the restaurant itself, her soul trapped inside, forever calling out in the dead of night. Late at night, if you listen closely, you might still hear it, the whisper of her name carried on the wind, echoing through the empty halls of the McDonald's. Cassie. And if you find a single French fry lying on the floor, untouched by anyone, you'd better run. Because whatever took her is still hungry. The haunted reputation of that McDonald's began to spread beyond the small town, becoming the stuff of urban legend. People traveled from miles away just to get a glimpse of the restaurant where the mysterious events took place, hoping to witness something for themselves, some tangible proof of the supernatural. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others as thrill seekers. But the employees, those who had to work the night shifts, weren't as eager. For them, this wasn't a game. Something sinister lingered there. They could feel it in the air. It was a Thursday night when Brittany, a new hire, started her first graveyard shift. The staff had warned her about the strange happenings, but she brushed it off. She wasn't the type to believe in ghosts or haunted places. It was just a job, she thought. McDonald's, fries, and burgers, how scary could it be? By midnight, the restaurant was quiet. The steady hum of the fryers was the only sound. Brittany was alone in the dining area, wiping down tables while her coworker, Marcus, handled the last of the drive-through orders. Outside, the parking lot was empty, save for a few scattered cars under the dim streetlights. As Brittany wiped down a booth near the windows, she heard something. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the sound grew clearer. A soft voice, barely audible over the hum of the kitchen. Brittany. She stopped mid-wipe, her heart skipping a beat. Did she hear that right? She stood still, straining to listen. The voice didn't come again. "Hey, Marcus," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. No response. She walked to the counter, leaning through the kitchen window. "Marcus, did you call me?" Marcus was busy with the drive-through headset on, taking an order. He glanced at her, clearly distracted. "What? No, I didn't say anything." Brittany frowned but shrugged it off, returning to her cleaning. She tried to shake the unsettling feeling creeping up her spine, telling herself it was just her mind playing tricks. The restaurant was quiet again, almost too quiet. That's when she saw it. A single French fry, lying on the booth she had just wiped down. Her stomach dropped. She knew it wasn't there a moment ago. She had just cleaned that booth. Slowly, she walked over, staring at the fry as if it held the answers to all the strange happenings in the restaurant. "Marcus," she called again, her voice trembling slightly. There was no answer. She reached out to pick up the fry, but as soon as her fingers touched it, the lights flickered. Once, twice. And then the entire restaurant plunged into darkness. Brittany froze, her breath caught in her throat. The only light now was the faint glow from the drive-through menu outside, and the dim emergency exit signs. Her pulse quickened as her eyes darted around, struggling to adjust to the sudden darkness. From behind her, she heard it again. Brittany. This time, it was unmistakable. The voice was soft, almost like a whisper in her ear. She spun around, her heart racing, but there was no one there, just the empty booths and the dark, silent kitchen beyond. She backed up slowly, her feet carrying her toward the front counter. She could feel her skin prickling with fear, her body screaming for her to leave, but she couldn't bring herself to move any faster. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing there in the shadows. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of a metal tray clattering to the floor. Brittany jumped, her heart nearly stopping in her chest. "Marcus," she called, her voice shaking. Still no response. The drive-through window was open, and she could hear the faint sound of the wind whistling through it. As she reached the counter, she saw Marcus standing at the back of the kitchen, near the fryers, his back to her. "Marcus?" she said again, this time more urgently. He didn't respond. He was just standing there, unnaturally still, his arms hanging limply at his sides. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Marcus?" she whispered, stepping cautiously behind the counter, edging her way toward him. The closer she got, the more she realized that something was off about the way he was standing. His posture was stiff, unnatural. When she was only a few feet away, she noticed something horrifying. His hands, they were covered in grease, dripping onto the floor, as if he had plunged them into the fryer. But he didn't seem to notice. He just stood there, his back rigid, his head slightly tilted as though he were listening to something. Brittany felt her blood run cold. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Suddenly he turned, his face blank and expressionless, his eyes glazed over like he wasn't really seeing her. His lips parted, but the voice that came out wasn't his. "Brittany," the voice whispered. It was the same voice. The same soft, haunting whisper that had been calling her name. But this time, it came from Marcus's mouth. Brittany stumbled backward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She felt her legs wobble, barely able to keep her balance as she turned and ran for the front door. She slammed into the glass, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. Panic set in. She banged on the door with all her strength, her screams for help muffled by the thick glass. She fumbled for her keys, her fingers shaking too badly to get them into the lock. Behind her, she could hear the slow, deliberate footsteps of Marcus, or whatever was inside of him, moving closer. Brittany. The whisper was louder now, echoing through the empty restaurant, bouncing off the walls like some sick, taunting chant. Her vision blurred with tears as she struggled to get the door open. The lock finally clicked, and she stumbled out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. She didn't stop running until she reached the gas station across the street. When she finally dared to look back, the McDonald's stood still and silent. The only movement, the flicker of the neon sign casting eerie shadows across the parking lot. Marcus never came out. After that night, Brittany quit. She never told anyone what she saw. Who would believe her? The police came, of course, when she reported Marcus missing. But just like Cassie, he was never found. The camera showed him standing at the Friar just before midnight. And then, nothing. 1 second he was there, and the next he was gone. But Brittany knew what she saw. And she knew one thing for certain. Whatever was haunting that McDonald's wasn't done, and it was still hungry.